Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming here. A special thank you must go to Evie Aspinall and the British Foreign Policy Group for sponsoring this evening. I'm Praful Nargand. I'm the Director of the Good Growth Foundation. I think we can all agree we're meeting here today in a moment of real turbulence. Of course, I mean geopolitical, not what's happening in Westminster. Because at the end of the day, there is an even greater level of instability in the world at large. The Strait of Hormuz, continuous assaults from Russia. Our ally across the Atlantic is much less reliable than they once were. Cyber attacks hit our hospitals, our businesses, and target vulnerable people too, in our country every day. Britain stands in the middle of it all. If there were ever a time to put our defence first, it is now, because we are under threat. Just a few weeks ago, the threat level was increased to severe. And most voters are more worried about Britain's defence and security than they were a decade ago. But when you ask the public to rank defence spending among their priorities, it still comes near the bottom, far behind the economy, the NHS, and immigration. And that's because the problems that voters worry most about, the cost of living crisis, which has robbed them of their choices and agency, a precarious economy that means they can no longer shape their lives and future. These things do not naturally or automatically point to defence as the answer. But the reality is, in this new era, economic security and national security are two sides of the same coin. They are inseparable. But the current structure of our defence industry and its spending isn't optimised for building resilience. Too often, money flows overseas rather than staying in Britain. Too often, small and medium-sized businesses are locked out of defence contracts while primes hold the keys. And when that happens, we lose our competitive edge. The innovators that could be the next generation are left to fall by the wayside. So the question we ask is, how can we build a defence settlement that protects our national security and backs British business and builds British resilience? And from our research and the report we released yesterday, I know you're all excited to read it, there's a handout on your seat, we know that the answer is to bring defence home. The pounds we spend on national security have to do double the work. And at the heart of that is British business. Right now, when major contracts go overseas, too much of that money goes with them. So we have proposed an offsetting scheme ensuring that when overseas companies are awarded contracts, the returns come back to Britain. What's more, we propose scoring primes on their behaviour with SMEs, a model that already has precedent from the United States, and cracking down on late payments to create that level playing field where SMEs can succeed. Because it is those smaller firms that build our domestic supply chains. It's those firms that develop the capabilities on which genuine sovereign capability and resilience depends. The SMEs are the heart of the British economy from which new ideas flow outwards. By backing them, that's how you turn a small business into a scale-up and maybe even into a unicorn. It's how you turn today's workshop into tomorrow's world-leading manufacturer. And you can see that potential everywhere. In Barrow-in-Furness and the Clyde, where shipbuilding still sustains communities. In Wharton and Samlesbury in Lancashire, where aerospace is world-class. In the North East, the South West, East of England and the West Midlands, where thousands of well-paid defence and security jobs already anchor local economies. Britain can and should be growing the next generation of world-class defence companies from its own base of entrepreneurs. Because if you have an idea that can make a difference to British security, Britain should be the place where you know you will be backed. And that's why we propose creating a defence bank to drive investment and underwrite innovation, breaking down that wall between start-up and commercial scale. Bringing defence home means bringing opportunity home. It means giving people back choice in their lives so they can once again shape their own futures, take risks and build successful businesses from the ground up. But all of this, rebuilding supply chains, growing our defence base, is for nothing if those businesses and our wider economy can be knocked out overnight by a cyber attack. Cyber isn't a peripheral threat. It is the front line that people are already facing. And that's why we must build local cyber resilience across the country. Because if we do not harden our cyber defences, the very foundations of our economic and national security will remain exposed. All of this is how Britain rebuilds its sovereign capability, its industrial base, and critically, a defence settlement that can last. The Secretary of State for Defence is right when he says Britain should be the best place to grow and invest in defence business. So it is an absolute pleasure to have a Defence Secretary here with us today who sees that bringing defence home to our workforce, to our industry, to our communities, isn't just a nice to have, but is central to building lasting security for this country in a far more dangerous world. So please join me in welcoming the Secretary of State for Defence, John Healey.
Well, thank you for that very generous introduction. Thank you to the Good Growth Foundation for hosting us tonight and for your report yesterday. Let me start. These have been a difficult few weeks. Politics is fracturing. Communities are struggling. Wars are raging. People are worried. And our world is changing fast. It's less predictable. It's more dangerous, with rising demands on defence. And for Labour, the last 10 days have been tough. We've lost many hundreds of good Labour councillors. We've turned in on ourselves. And as John Healey likes to remind me, I've been around a while. Let me tell you, through nearly 30 years in Parliament, in every Labour cabinet and shadow cabinet since Gordon Brown, my single driving purpose has been to see Labour leading a successful government, Labour leading a successful country. And I've also not forgotten the pains of opposition, the battle over 14 years to get the public to trust Labour again on managing the economy and defending the country. So we must not lose sight now of the duty that people gave us in 2024, the special opportunity of government. We must not throw away so lightly the power we were given. Because politics to me is not about the individual, it's about the country. I don't much care for photo opportunities or PR firms. People will not forgive us if they think we're more concerned about ourselves than we are about them. And I say to my colleagues in Parliament what Michael Gove once said, which is, we govern by consent, through the way we behave, the way we deliver change, the trust with the public. And right now, the very credibility of Labour in government is at stake. We must get serious. It's not about us, not about the insiders of politics. It's about the interests of this nation. We must be a government that steers Britain through the conflicts we're in and the crises that we face. We must be a party that manages ourselves constructively and in a well-ordered way. Because voters on May the 7th said, don't tell us how things are getting better. Show us how things are getting better. And so today, I want to set out how we can respond to deliver both the security and the opportunity denied to too many parts of Britain for too long. And in particular, like the Good Growth Foundation's report itself, to point out how defence can and is playing a leading part in this mission. We're 2 years into this Labour government, and I know we're making a difference. Change is underway. Yes, of course, everyone wants more change, more quickly, but most fair-minded people recognise that things can't just change overnight. We promised to cut NHS waiting lists. We've slashed them by 500,000. We promised protection for renters, and we've ended eviction for no fault or no reason. We promised the poorest children a better start in life. And so new childcare payments, free breakfast clubs, and the end of the two-child benefit cap mean that hundreds of thousands of kids are now being lifted out of poverty. And we've taken back into public ownership the homes that our military families live in. And we've already upgraded 1,200 of the very worst of those. Every one of these changes, driven by Labour values, done by Labour in Parliament, delivered in less than 2 years. Every one only possible with Labour in government. And these Labour values aren't changing, but the world is. Global growth is sluggish, global debt is high, technological change is accelerating, and threats are rising. And we're now in the 5th year of Putin's full-scale war on Ukraine. Iran, that war sends economic shocks worldwide, and NATO allies now must be ready to resist a Russian incursion by 2030. Make no mistake, these are serious times, and we have to demonstrate through what we do how we will meet this moment. And I would say to you time and again, since the election, Keir Starmer as Prime Minister has shown how he will step up and how Britain can lead. Before Keir, there was no coalition of the willing for Ukraine. There was no multinational mission for Hormuz. There was no Trinity House agreement with Germany, no Luna House agreement with Norway, no rebooted Lancaster House agreement with France. There was no trade deal for the UK with the US, with India, or the European Union. And at the Munich Security Summit in February, Keir Starmer said, hard power is now the currency of the age. He confirmed that even after the largest increase in defence spending since the end of the Cold War with this government, he said we must spend more, faster. And we will spend more, and we will go further. But we can't just spend more, we've got to spend better. And every pound spent on defence needs to work twice. First for national security, and second for British industry. And you know, defence has got to respond to something else too. Low growth and falling living standards have created a profound pessimism and powerlessness. And this unease is eroding our politics, it's eroding our communities. And no government can ignore that, no Defence Secretary can ignore that. Our working class families are the lifeblood of this country. They're the backbone of our armed forces. They don't ask for much. A home they can afford, a job they can be proud of, wages they can live on, first-class education for their children, and above all, a story of hope they can tell their kids and their families and their workmates. And what unites the experience of the place that I live in Rotherham and the places that I visit across Britain is one word: insecurity. I think families are fed up with being buffeted by crisis after crisis, facing rising costs, squeezed living standards, the insecurity, as Puffle said, of modern work. More than 4 million people now self-employed, millions more agency workers, and shockingly 1 million young people now not in work, training or education. And for communities like ours in South Yorkshire, we've seen for decades jobs go and not come back. And restoring hope, that starts with security. You can't feel hopeful if you don't feel secure. And I passionately believe that defence can help turn this around. Because the rising defence investment under this government comes with a fundamentally new Labour approach. A defence dividend that boosts British industry a back British mission to boost skills, innovation and productivity. And this is a big shift from a failed past. You know, since the election we signed over 1,200 major defence contracts, nearly 9 out of 10 to those in British-based firms boosting British-based jobs. 70% of these are outside London and the South East. So look at South Yorkshire. We brought artillery manufacturing back to Britain for the first time in a generation. Look at Barrow. We've created over 1,800 new jobs since the last election alone. And look at Scotland. The shipyards on the Clyde, order books full for years to come. This doesn't just happen. This is our Labour choice. Directing more defence investment to British jobs, winning record defence exports for Britain. And I want this to be the story for every part of Britain. Defence as a byword for opportunity, defence as an engine for growth and an engine for hope. In case anyone's tempted to argue that, well, British jobs is not the military's concern, one clear lesson from Ukraine is that when a country is under threat or forced to fight, its forces are only as strong as the industry and the innovators that stand behind them. And this is a fundamental part of the deterrence that we have as a nation, the deterrence that we have as NATO. So let me tell you something about the people who work in our defence industries. The average salary is around £57,000. That's 10,000 more than other sectors in manufacturing. These are good, skilled, unionised jobs. And last year I designated the unions as part of our defence industrial base for the first time, with seats on our Defence Industrial Joint Council. Only Labour could bring the workforce into the heart of decision making. And we'll continue down that path, harnessing the power of the trade unions to help British skills, restoring ideas like the Union Learning Fund for defence. Because let me tell you something else about the people working in defence. There's a huge shortage of homegrown talent. Those of you in the room who run businesses know this fact. And while we appreciate every welder or programmer that comes from overseas, we're determined now to get more British youngsters through the door. That's why we're creating 5 Defence Excellence Colleges. Young people in Lincoln, Blackpool, Rotherham, Plymouth and Yeovil. That's why we've established the Defence Growth Deals in England, in Wales, in Scotland and in Northern Ireland. And it's why we launched the new Defence Universities Alliance for universities that are proud to do research that helps our national security. And these are skills that are important in their own right. They're essential for the security of our nation. Because the things we do in the MOD, in the security services, in the armed forces, are there to meet very serious threats, like from Russia. The ships, the submarines that Putin sends to map our undersea cables and our pipelines have a deadly serious purpose: to cut our power supplies, to cut our communication to British homes and British businesses. And you know what deters them? It's the submarines we build in Barrow. It's the drones we build in Plymouth. It's the helicopters we build in Yeovil. And our factories, our labs, our software studios, our shipyards, and thousands of small family firms are quietly innovating the kit that our soldiers, our sailors, our aircrew need. They're all there to say to Vladimir Putin and the criminal regime in Iran, don't even think about it. And these industries and the armed forces they supply are more than an economic force in their own right. The security they create underpins business confidence, financial sector sentiment, gilt yields, and foreign investment into the UK. The bond market, as Liz Truss found out, does not obey the government. Just as fiscal credibility is the bedrock of economic security, so it is for our national security. Because all the calculations about gilt yields, what counts for investors is the sentiment about our country. They're making judgments about who we are, the maturity of our political system, our ability to rearm while maintaining sound public finances, our willingness to make hard choices. And countries that cannot pay their way cannot defend themselves. That's why I've been determined from the outset to work so closely and so hard with the Chancellor on the Defence Industrial Strategy, on the defence spending plan and the uplift that's bigger than any time since the Cold War, and on the Defence Investment Plan, which I promise is coming soon. But government is acting now to back British innovators for the next generation of defence jobs. And I call on those private investors to do the same. More than half of all AI investment in Europe this year is coming here in Britain. And my message to the innovators and the entrepreneurs in AI, in cyber, in automation, in high-tech industries of the future is, you are all welcome. I want Britain to become the best place in the world to start and to grow a defence business. And let me tell you why this matters. Ernest Bevin was right. People don't just want a penny on pound or an hour off the day. They want control over their own lives. Many young people would love to do this and start a business, but they don't feel able to take the risks. And as Defence Secretary, I'm determined that we will help them grow as part of a next generation of defence businesses. Because last summer, Britain, alongside 31 NATO allies, we all made that commitment to increase defence spending to 2035 to 3.5%. We estimate that means by 2035, 500,000 Brits will work in the defence industry. And those companies of the 2030s don't start then, they start now. And that's why I can announce I've awarded 13 contracts to Britain's next potential defence unicorns. British tech companies, half of which have never worked in defence before, half of which have been set up within the last 5 years, all of which have the potential to become billion-pound FTSE 100 companies. And it's this generation that should be, that want to be, the entrepreneurs of this country, that at the moment too often spending half their monthly salary on their rent, too often leaving university with a debt pile that's double their starting salaries. And is it any surprise then that when 6 in 10 young people say they would like to start a business, only 1 in 6 goes on to try? And the way to sustain growth that funds our public services is giving that generation the chance to take the risk and to innovate. And the defence sector can be the standout sector. It can be the standout sector for all of this, raising wages, raising productivity, increasing innovation, levels of enterprise. That's what defence offers, and that's what Labour can deliver. Pride, growth, security. And I tell you, the Labour Party that I'm proud to represent, it's not just a political party, it's a set of values. It's a 120-year mission, bringing prosperity and progress in peacetime, bringing strength and determination in wartime. Yes, we need to go further. Yes, we need to be bolder. Yes, we need to offer people hope for the future, and that starts with security. Families across Britain will not feel hopeful if they don't feel secure. So like those who came before us, we rearm in the face of threats, We strengthen our alliances, we confront dictators, we build our British industry. And in the process, we could unite our country around a common purpose: security and opportunity, delivering for defence and delivering for Britain. Thank you.
Brilliant. Okay, fantastic. The microphone is working. I wasn't sure if it was. Thank you so much. We're now going to go to a short panel discussion between the three of us, and then I'll open it up for some questions. And we're delighted to be joined by John Bew, Professor at King's College London, and of course a foreign policy advisor in number 10 to successive Prime Ministers. John, if I can just start with you, just your reaction to what the Defence Secretary has just said, and if you could just set the kind of wider context for us.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, and to you, Lara, thank you to the Good Growth Foundation. It's always very good to see the Secretary of State for Defence. We worked together for, I think, 4 months in my last phase in government, and you may have heard this, the public were saying that just what a good and honourable man John is. So it's always it's a perfect preamble for destroying what he's going to say in this speech. No, I'll be gentle. I did think of a historical parallel to begin as a historian by training, which was in 1951, the Attlee government leaped or limped, should I say, towards the end of its government, entirely divided over a very similar debate or question, which was the price and cost of rearmament to enforce a UN Security Council resolution in the Korean War. And that went right up against different parts of the Labour Party that wanted to focus on welfare, wanted to expand NHS provision to prescription glasses and dentistry. And it's just to reflect on the point that these choices are hard and these choices are tough, and we have lots of interesting conversations about leveraging private sector finance and innovation in the country, but ultimately, because of the scale of what we're talking about, it comes down to public finances. So I think it's very important when people are complaining they're waiting for the dip. This is why these things are tough and these things are very difficult. That's the first observation. The second is it's sometimes I find from my experience in number 10, there's a difference between governing by consent, and you quoted Michael Gove to great effect at the start of your speech, and then being blinded by polling figures. And the polling figures are tough for those of us, most of us in this room and on this panel, who believe in very much in the case for increased defence spending. The polling figures say defence most of the time is quite low down the concerns of the population. The polling figures say that when offered a choice, they want other and value other things in their lives as well. So it's the job of those in political life to lead. And that's a difficult thing to do, and it's a challenging thing to do against a backdrop and context. And how do you win the argument around defence and security? One way that defence does it is to focus on the threat and the extent of the challenge to the United Kingdom from different actors. You mentioned Iran, you mentioned Russia, others, those who wish to do us harm or are hostile to us. And I think that is understood increasingly if you look at our media coverage and you look at how the public understands these things. A second way to do it is to appeal to values, and I think the British people always amaze on the upside. Look at the response to Ukraine. Ukraine was never a top issue for most British citizens at the time of the war began in 2022, but the remarkable response across the country is held relatively firm. I know people study the polling figures more extensively than I do as well. But I just give two arguments which I think are quite important. They're not slam dunk arguments, but they're two arguments that I think I'd like to see a bit more in the public explanation. And John did a good job of lighting on two of them. First of all, if you take the UK projections for growth at the start of COVID and also at the start of the Iran crisis, two very different governments in very different contexts. They had relatively high projections for growth in the G7 context, all of us lagging behind the Americans as well. They're up in the top quarter. In response to both those crises, the supply chain shutdown of the global economy over COVID, and secondly, security incident in the Strait of Hormuz with a lot of cascading effects, we go from second, third projected growth for G7 to the bottom. in both those instances, because we are uniquely exposed, because of the nature and pattern of our economy, to these international trends. And I think just hammering that argument time and time again is a good one. The second one, and this is to pick up on something the Prime Minister said in the Munich Security Conference that John quoted as well, which is that hard power is the currency of our age. I think that's a very important point, but what does that mean? We are in a period in which everything is being renegotiated. Our tariffs, our imports controls, our export controls, the relative expectations and areas of geographic focus among allies and partners, the nature of our social contract, relative spend and welfare, energy, etc., etc. To be part of that renegotiation, you mentioned many of the things the government's agreed bilaterally or internationally, and I would say also the previous government had a spurt of these bilateral agreements and trade deals as well. To be at the table and to have one's voice heard, do not underestimate that when it comes to providing security, it's not only providing security in the role you can do in providing security for families and communities, it's also providing security among an alliance system and with partnerships as well. And as I say, these aren't slam dunk arguments, but they are the reality. My lived life as foreign policy advisor in number 10, it's the first thing on the agenda. It's the thing that gives you access on trade deals, on technology deals, all the things that are vital for the future. This is an absolutely fundamental instrument of foreign policy. So, I say these are technical arguments. They're not tabloid arguments. They're not arguments that naturally translate to the 6 o'clock news. But I think stated in what's quite a mature and literate electorate, time and time again, and explained in that type of way, things that have direct consequence to the UK's ability to protect and promote interests as well as defend against threats. There's a positive story as well as a negative story. That's how I'd like to see the discourse adjusted a little bit.
It's really interesting. Well, I mean, just to that point, I guess, outwardly you've been making some of those points publicly, but also internally you have been trying to make the case for the funding for the Defence Investment Plan. And I think we shouldn't let this evening go by without mentioning the political instability that we're seeing in Westminster at the moment. I just wonder if you could reflect a bit more explicitly on what the last couple of weeks have meant for the Defence Investment Plan and its publication. Is it fair to say that we're going to see it later as a result of the aftermath of the local elections?
No, but it is fair to say the last 10-12 days have been a distraction from the business of government across the board. It's why my message to my colleagues and today is we have to remember, we have to be serious about the duty we've been given, which is to be a good government. And part of being a good government, and I think the track record actually of this government and of the Prime Minister has been recognising and responding to the conflicts, building and demonstrating that Britain again can bring nations together in the way that John Bew has talked about there. The coalition of the willing for Ukraine, we co-lead that with the French. I've taken on the leadership of the Ukraine Defence Contact Group alongside the Germans. That's nearly 50 nations there to step up the military aid we're providing to Ukraine to keep them in the fight. The multinational mission for Hormuz, alongside the French. I chaired a meeting last week, the first ever of defence ministers, over 30 nations, to build the political support behind the military plans that we're developing. These are a very special role that Britain can play, and I've, to be honest, been quite surprised coming into government how ready the other nations, particularly in Europe, are to look to the UK for this sort of leadership on security and on military alliance building. And I would say as a Labour Party with values that are intrinsically and profoundly internationalist and pro-European, set the European Union aside, it is that ability to led by Keir Starmer actually in recent over the last 20 months or so, that has demonstrated that Britain can play that sort of role. And it has then the sort of spin-off potential benefits that John Bew talked about. It builds the confidence in Britain as a reliable ally. It builds the relationships on which it is possible then to do trade deals or to secure, as we have as a government, some of the biggest export deals in defence in our history. the warships deal with Norway, the Typhoon deal with Turkey. So this is a way of trying to ensure that defence isn't just seen as equipping our armed forces, but defence is seen central to the success of the government and central to the success of the country.
Can I ask you a question on people's kind of confidence in the procurement system more generally, specifically with regard to this kind of British announcement? Some people might say, I don't really mind where my tech comes from. Actually, I would much rather just get it from the best place possible, especially given the kind of wider geopolitical context that you've painted, which is one of profound uncertainty. Perhaps they just want the so-called quote-unquote best. What is the kind of answer to that point, do you think?
I think three things. It matters how sound our British industrial innovation base is. It matters how sound our confidence of some of the things we do in partnership with close allies, because we have to rely on that when they come under pressure. Secondly, if we are to meet the challenge that John Bew mentioned there, to convince a British public that is increasingly worried, for whom defence of the country and a fear of conflict is increasingly high up their list of issues, if we want them to accept and support this country investing more in defence, we have to not just demonstrate that we spend what we invest well, but it brings other benefits directly to them, places they know and the opportunities they see for their areas. And that's why the mission to back Britain wherever we can through our defence procurement is so important, and where we will decide in some cases to buy abroad, then we're introducing, as the Good Growth Foundation report suggests, for the first time in Britain, an offset policy that means there will be some benefit from any contracts that go abroad back to British skills, British opportunities and small firm support here as well.
Okay, interesting. And I mean, on this question of trying to build enough public support for defence spending, clearly John is correct that it's rising up people's priorities. They understand that the world is getting more dangerous, but when you ask them whether or not, of course, they want more defending, and they have to lose out in some other ways, and that complicates the whole ever so slightly. Thinking about your role as a historian specifically, are there kind of precedents that you can think of that speak well to periods in which a leader in some form has actually managed to kind of rally people behind an increase in defence in circumstances where the fiscal constraints are actually, as they are at the moment, quite severe?
Yeah, I mean, the precedents, there are precedents, of course, in British history, but the precedents tell you just how difficult and challenging that type of thing is. So people talk about polling today and relative lack of willingness to fight for the country, for example. If anyone polled the UK, as they did with mass observation surveys, in 1939 and 1940, they would find a pretty depressing picture and a very similar picture. The more so because people had a very strong memory of the First World War. They had political promises made to them, like homes fit for heroes, and then they faced industrial strife, the general strike, mass unemployment, all these difficulties and challenges as well. So, a lot of this comes down to political leadership and a willingness to make choices that you are on the hook for in subsequent moments in time. And I know how difficult it is, and I was closely involved in, a little bit involved with the start of the SDR process and the current government's national security strategy, but also in previous governments, just how difficult and challenging it is to make those leaps. I do remember every defence spending increase we've had, and we've had 3 of them, significant ones, since 2021. Of course, was banded as the biggest increase since the end of the Cold War. Why is that? Because there's been such a dip prior to that as well. So we are remaking a whole lot of areas that have been allowed to atrophy. Then a broader point about the defence industrial base. So this is tough. Even if you find a significant uplift, and John will know this as well as anyone else, and there's other former ministers of different political stripes in the audience as well, a lot of it is about maintaining things that are boring and unnecessary, like munitions and stockpiles. A lot of it is about maintaining dry docks or ports. I think in Belfast, where I'm from, and the Fleet Solid Support Ship deal with Harland and Wolff as well. Just keeping things ticking over for when you need an upsurge in the lift as well, because you can't turn things on and off again in the midst of it. Take GCAP. the Global Combat Air Programme and an allied programme with Italy and Japan as well. A lot of that is about keeping jobs in aerospace industries as well. So unless you're visiting an enormous uplift bigger than anything that's been reported, there's not necessarily going to be a surge of white-collar, blue-collar jobs associated with that. But, as John says also, where you begin to have the marginal difference is when you have these smaller tech startup firms with a relatively benign relationship with the larger firms as well. And then on this skills side of things as well. So let me just do one shout out from my own institute, King's College London, which has just merged with Cranfield University, which is discussing exploring a merger with Cranfield University, which is to combine the engineering and technical expertise with this sort of broader understanding of world international affairs as well. That's the type of thing where other parts of non-governmental parts of public life need to step up and engage more seriously about that conversation of defence and security. And you are getting universities more comfortable talking about defence and security. You are getting institutes, when it comes to engineering and elsewhere, being more comfortable talking about defence and security. So you can see there's more positive cultural changes, but I go back to the fundamentals. Even when more finance is flowing, when there's more external finance as well, ultimately this is a matter of public spending. And every country is facing that reality. And it's hard for some of us, and I include the UK and France in particular, to borrow right now for the dreaded gilt yields and bond markets that John mentioned as well. So a few of us are in a tighter space. But this has to be a choice. It has to be a national choice, and there's no point pretending that there's no trade-offs in making that choice as well.
That's really interesting. And
but John, first of all, what a great thing, Cranfield and King's coming together like that. Two universities with a mission ahead of any other university to advance the interests and strength of our national security. And I think two universities now that are probably the only university with its own runway to be able to do some of your sort of practical testing as well as your academic research. But I just would say it isn't right somebody to say, well, this is you're claiming it to be the third time this is the largest increase since the end of the Cold War. The facts are there in the figures, the facts are there in the contracts that we're letting. The defence budget this year is over £11 billion more than the last year of the last government. The contracts that we're now letting, over 1,200 major contracts since the election, are going nearly 9 out of 10 to British-based firms. They're going to the small firms, the 13 defence tech firms that we're backing today. And to your point, Lara, and your interest in procurement, we're doing this faster, we're doing this more effectively, but notwithstanding this, the threats that we face, the conflicts that we're in, mean that we have to do more. We've set that out as a government. That's the challenge. And the political challenge to us, particularly during this period, is not to turn inward, is to recognise that we have a duty as a government to help see the country through these conflicts we're in and the looming crises that we may face. And we are determined that that's exactly what we will do.
I'm going to open it up to questions, but I just want to ask you one final thing, which regards the very last remarks that you just made, namely that you clearly don't want to see, you're implying, an imminent leadership contest. And I should ask you to reflect, if Andy Burnham is Prime Minister in the near future, what do you think defence under Andy Burnham-led Labour government looks like?
Andy Burnham. Look, I've known Andy Burnham for a long time. I sat alongside him in Gordon Brown's cabinet. In fact, I did a visit with him several weeks ago to a newly funded veterans project in Manchester. Lara, one step at a time. Andy has to get selected as the Labour candidate for this by-election in Makerfield. If he does, I'll be up there campaigning.
And you're not worried about what a Labour government led by him would mean for this wider defence debate?
No, well, hang on, one step at a time. Keir Starmer's the Prime Minister. There is no contest. There is no challenge. And for now, I'm saying exactly what I'm saying to you, to Labour MPs. Remember, what we were elected to do, the trust that we won and were given from people in July 2024, and our job, especially now, with the looming crises in the world and the uncertainty, now above all, people are looking to their government to see them through this period.
Okay, we'll open up to some questions now. We're going to start with Evie Aspinall from the British Foreign Policy Group.
Thank you for your remarks. You say defence can be an engine to growth, but how do you convince the public, whose top priority is still the pound in their back pocket, and who are unconvinced of the scale of the threats we face, that high defence spending should be prioritised over investment in other areas such as housing and healthcare, which may drive growth more quickly?
Well, as John Bew said, there are no easy decisions in government, but I would just say we will make the defence investment work for the country and the economy, not just the security. And I think at a time when people recognise we need to strengthen our forces, that we've got to strengthen our alliances, because when Keir Starmer talked about hard power being the currency of the age, I think you've also seen as a characteristic an investment in hard power by Labour in government, an investment in strong alliances, and an investment and a demonstration of sure diplomacy. It's that combination that makes a country stronger, more influential, and ultimately more secure. And as far as the argument to the British public go, if we can demonstrate, as we are, that we're building the British industrial base, we're building the innovation base, we're backing the firms that are going to create the jobs, the enterprises of the next decade, then I think we can win that bigger argument as well. So it isn't just how much we spend, it is how well we spend it.
Okay, Nina from PA.
Thank you. You talked there about photo ops and PR firms. You said people won't forgive us if we're more focused on ourselves than we are now. It sounds like you're a bit frustrated by some of the leadership documents going on in the party at the moment. Do you see this as a needless contest for some? Specifically, your Defence Minister, Al Carnes, is reportedly spending paying thousands of pounds on promotional videos. Is this the kind of thing you worry might be putting public on?
Nina, I'm speaking for myself. I'm speaking for the way that I read the views of people expressed in the election 12 days ago. And that sentiment that I know, having fought many elections, that if people think politicians are interested in themselves and not them, then they'll turn away. And for Labour MPs to turn inward, talk among themselves, is a recipe for putting at risk the very credibility of Labour in government itself. And as far as photo opportunities and PR goes, those who know me, I've been pretty consistent over nearly 30 years. In fact, on the first day that I walked through the main building on the 5th of July to speak to 300 odd people who had been held back in the atrium of the MOD in sort of sweaty, hot conditions, I said to them I was someone who was more interested in results than photo opportunities. And that is fundamentally what we're in government to do. And that is what I am determined to do. And as a defence team of ministers, that is what we're doing. And I would say, above all, we as the team of defence ministers at this time have a clearer duty and a bigger responsibility to stick to the task of government and make sure that we do our jobs.
Okay, Deborah Haynes from Sky News.
Thank you, Secretary. You talked about the attractiveness of jobs in the defence sector, and yet people have lost their jobs in the defence industry. Companies have gone under. Companies right now are at risk of going bust because of the delay in the publication of the defence investment plan. Will you take the opportunity right now to apologise to everybody in the defence industry and in the armed forces who have been affected by the uncertainty created by this delay, regardless of the contracts that you've continued to sign? in the autumn asking when this defence investment plan is going to come out. Can you please put us out of our misery, and instead of saying we're promising to do it fast, we're working really hard, blah blah blah, that it will come out next month and at least before the NATO summit in early July. Please, can you give that certainty? Thank you.
Everyone would have wanted to see the Defence Investment Plan published sooner, including and especially me. I would say to you, though, that, and we're close, but I would say to you this, it has not stopped us increasing defence investment. We've got over 11 billion more in the defence budget this year than in the last year of the last government. It hasn't stopped us letting major contracts that are creating jobs right across the country. And we're doing that in a way that directs British defence investment, which is on the increase, first and foremost to British-based firms that create British-based jobs. That's the way that we make the increasing defence investment under this government work twice, once for our national security and once for our economy.
Okay, Larissa Brown from The Times.
Thank you, Secretary of State. Assuming that it's on to 18 billion over the next 4 years for defence, do you think that'll be enough to do everything that you plan to do, or will you still have to make cuts? And also, referred to our funds, and is it mentioned, and I was just wondering why has our funds not been able to see the defence investment plan? Thank you.
Well, first, Al is, I've only known Al since he was elected to Parliament at the last election. I'm so great and pleased he's part of the defence team. He has such an extraordinary military record. He's leading his first bill through Parliament at the moment with the Armed Forces Bill. And he may not deal with finance or procurement, but he is central to what is central to defence at the moment, which is our operations. Our operations to protect Britain and the seas around Britain, our operations to protect allies in the Middle East, our operations to play a big part in protecting NATO's eastern flank, a big part in our plans to help lead the Arctic Sentry High North mission that NATO is providing up there. As far as the Defence Investment Plan goes, we will have that in place. It will kick us off to fund the delivery of the Strategic Defence Review, which was a 10-year vision. It's there to drive the transformation of defence, the rapid strengthening of our armed forces, and it's there to also reinforce the alliances that we can build and the role that Britain uniquely can play in helping develop a more European NATO, as we recognise the requirements of the US for European nations to do more of the heavy lifting in NATO, and the requirements of European nations to step up on support for Ukraine. On all fronts, we've been doing that. On all fronts, the Defence Investment Plan will help reinforce that. And on all fronts, that is part of the Strategic Defence Review that we published nearly a year ago.
Okay, Mason Boycott-Owen from Politico.
You mentioned the current Labour Party leadership chatter is distracting from the work of government. Do you have confidence that your junior Minister path is completely focused on his job government? You know, there are numerous reports that he's privately canvassing support for a leadership bid. You said his portfolio is live operations. This is quite important that he hasn't full attention on it. Have you spoken to him about any of his leadership ambitions? Do you personally back him if he was to make a bid?
Look, there's no leadership contest, there's no leadership challenge. Al is just a great and unique member of the defence team and the Parliamentary Labour Party. I'm really proud to have him as part of the team. I wanted him part of the defence team. He's making a special contribution at the moment, and I just tell you, every one of our defence ministers is working flat out because we recognise the really important role that we've got on behalf of the country as well as part of this government to keep things on track.
Okay, one from the room before we go for drinks. Yes.
This is about resources and the ability to move at pace. Will the constraints placed on the model civil service on defence reform, including hiring freezes and voluntary severance, hinder the speed at which procurement of all DLOs, including infrastructure, which a number of my colleagues represent, will need to be placed once the announcement of the DIP releases the pent-up demand articulated by the SDR commitments?
There are restrictions. I'd like to get a position where we can reshape our workforce so that we can lift those restrictions. But I'd just say to you, it hasn't stopped us moving at much faster pace. I've announced the 13 defence tech firms that will get funding as potential UK defence unicorns. That was something that I announced in January, and within 4 months we've moved to those sort of contracts. You've seen the ability of defence to move fast through the work of the Task Force Kindred in support for Ukraine, and you've seen the work also, I hope, of the Task Force Sabre, the way that we've replicated the lessons that we've learned from Kindred in the face of this Middle Eastern conflict. And Luke Pollard is here as our Minister for Defence Readiness and Industry, and he's led that work in order to be able to match some of the brilliant innovations that are going on in British firms with the immediate defensive needs of Middle Eastern allies that we're helping defend out there. We can do this, and we want to get on to do the job.
Okay, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Thank you particularly to John Bew as well, and our brilliant panellists, also Secretary of State. We will have time for some drinks, albeit not as much time. I'm sorry we ran over slightly, but thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Laura. Balancing that sort of discussion with, particularly for your press colleagues, giving them a chance to do that sort of press conference style examination. I feel we've underused John here. No, that's fine. No, that's fine. Thank you so much for that. I just have to say, Laura.
That was one before. I was just going to, I think it was just yeah, I don't know either. This was, you think that was PAs?
This is me and that's PA.
These two are PAs. This one in the middle is mine as well.
Yes, I don't know.
So, do you think that's...
Yeah, when you just
we're in Paddington.
Is that...
Is there?
I
don't know. The PA good too.
Oh, okay. I don't know.
I'll take it back.
Thank you. I found out I got another one, so I just got two up there now.
One of these is yours and one's mine, so I'm going to have a quick listen to find out. Sure. Two. This one's mine, that's yours.
That's fine, I believe you.
No, I can hear mine. I've only got one now.
Great, cool.
You good?
Yeah.